Now the question we're all asking is, will this sticky uppy bit keep Red Bull ahead? Formula One is back and the F1 teams are doing what everybody should do at this time of the year. They've headed to the beach, though the beach in question is the Zandvoort circuit in the Netherlands. Welcome to Tech Talk. Coming up, we take a look at Williams' dramatic new roll hoop design. We ask McLaren why their upgrades are more effective than every other team's, and we look at Red Bull's efforts to try to make their high downforce package actually work. Well, before we take a look at all of that, let's take a look back at what's happened over the last few weeks. And it hasn't just been everybody sitting on the beach getting suntans. Going all the way back to the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, we had a change of result just after the race had finished. George Russell of Mercedes got disqualified for having a car that was underweight. It's pretty much a slam dunk penalty. But the team have been taking a little bit of a close look at why that car got disqualified. And it wasn't just down to Russell's one-stop strategy and losing a lot of rubber off those tyres that were incredibly old by the end of the race. In fact, Mercedes have taken a look at it. They think it's down to plank wear, brake wear, general wear and tear on the car. As the race goes on, the cars lose a little bit of weight, just a few grams here and there, but it does all make the difference. The thing they've discovered that made the big difference, though, was George Russell himself. He hadn't eaten enough food before the race. The driver was a little bit too light as well, and all of those factors added up to seeing the car being underweight at the end of the race and leading to disqualification. Bad luck for Russell. Perhaps he should have had that steak and chips the night before. Another big change, or maybe not so big a change, has been spotted in the FIA technical regulations. There's been a lot of news stories bouncing around about a change to the regulations related to brakes. The FIA have made it very clear in the revised technical regulations that teams cannot use differential braking to improve cornering performance, so braking one wheel more than the other three to help the car turn slightly more or turn in slightly more. This is something that McLaren experimented with extensively in 1997 and 1998 before that technology, brake steer, was strictly banned. The original technology was first tested on a Formula 4 2000 car as one of the team's engineers had been playing around with their own race car in their garage, found a big benefit and utilised it on track. Well, all of that has been banned. But what's behind all of this mid-season rule changes? Well, a lot of noise has been made about it, but in reality, we're actually on version 7 of the FIA technical regulations, and the FIA are constantly tinkering with the technical rules of Formula One and sporting regulations as well. It doesn't mean any team is actually utilising those practices that they're banning. It just means that the FIA have noticed something that could be done and decide to shut it down in advance. Well, let's take a look at what's been going on at Zandvoort, because there are some really interesting technical developments, and it's unusual for me to start with the Williams team, but I'm actually quite excited about what this team have done to their car. And before we get into depth about some of the things on the roll hoop, which I mentioned earlier, let's listen to Pat Fry describe to Will Buxton what the team have been doing to the car.
We've got a completely new design of floor, and to go with that, a different shaped top body. You always develop those two things sort of together, really. There's a little bit of a change on the radiator entries, and then another change that you can't see is we've redesigned the roll hoop of the car. Again, it's a metallic structure, but just to get some more weight out of it. So we're still trying to push and drive the weight down towards the limit. We're not quite there yet, but we're still working on that.
That's absolutely fascinating stuff, and I wanted to take a closer look at that change to the roll hoop because it's really exciting me, and it's really unusual for a team to make such a fundamental change to the chassis during the season. So what's got me so excited? Well, take a look at this section. This is what we call the roll hoop of the car. It's not really hoop shaped anymore, and some people refer to it as the airbox. Well, strictly speaking, the airbox is the bit that the air flows into behind the driver's head, bit of cooling in there, and all the combustion gas going down into the V6 engine comes through that. But the really important bit is the structure of the hoop itself. Now, you've got this section here that you can see on the outside, but underneath that carbon fibre shrouding is a structure that looks a little bit sort of like this, that goes over the driver's head, and if the car flips over, it protects their head in theory. And that structure's made usually out of aluminium or titanium, and what it sounds like Williams have done is they've redesigned this structure of the car. But this is one of the fundamental safety structures on every single F1 car, and the FIA will have to approve any new design. Well, the Williams team have indicated that they got approval for that new design from the FIA just at the start of the summer break, and they were able to change this section on both cars, which is a big job, and then introduce it for this race. And that's reduced the weight on the highest point of the car. We don't know by how much they've reduced the weight, but it is thought to be quite significant. Not least because it's so high on the car, but also that allows them to muck about with stuff lower down in the car. Could be quite a big performance advantage. But to do it, they'll have had to take the chassis they've got. And remember, Williams were struggling to build chassis at the start of this year, lop off the roll hoop and glue on, because that's how they do it, new roll hoops onto the top of the car. That is a big and brave job. And I can't remember the last time a team did that during the season. Pretty fundamental stuff from Williams. But it's not just that. The team have also been working on a really big aerodynamic upgrade. We heard Pat talking about it earlier, but the big thing here, he played it down a little bit, didn't he? But the change to the side pod ducting shape is pretty much following that trend we've seen McLaren use, Red Bull and others, with that protruding upper section above the main radiator cooling duct, which has been completely reshaped in this design. Now, the team have told me and told Will that they haven't changed the cooler layout underneath the bodywork, even though they could have done, but the side pod shape itself is fundamentally different. Now, will this bring a big aerodynamic advantage to the Williams? Well, we'll have to wait and see how it performs on a high downforce track. And of course, next, it's one of Williams' strong suits, Monza, high-speed, low-drag track. So that should work out quite well for the Williams team, but we'll have to see how it performs. And in the wet and windy conditions in Zandvoort, it's a little bit jury's out at the moment. And you can see that change to the side pod shape quite clearly here. It's following that same trend that we've seen a number of teams use. They've modified the gullies on the top of the side pod ever so slightly, extended the flat section along the top, and then it dips down much more aggressively. Aston Martin pioneered that layout, and it's something Williams are following. Also, a new floor on the car. You don't really get to see all the details on these new floors, do you? Because it's all underneath. It's all tiny little bits of sculpting, but Williams are hoping that's going to bring big results. Now, for a little team like Williams, this is a major, major package. But will it work? Well, one team that gets everything seemingly working every time they bring an upgrade, well, that's McLaren, isn't it? And talking to McLaren, and surprising me in wearing orange, or is it papaya colours, so Rob Marshall had a word with Will Buxton about what McLaren had introduced on this car for Zandvoort.
Yeah, so it's been a while since we've had an upgrade. Our last significant upgrade was Miami, and since then, actually, there have been really fault fixes, is all we've really applied. So here we've come with some little tweaks and some more major ones. So we've got a new rear wing. That's probably our biggest device for this weekend. It's a high downforce wing which replaces another one, which is now effectively obsolete, provided this one delivers what we hope. It's a bit more efficient. Should give us a bit more downforce for sort of similar levels of drag. So we kind of think it's a good step for us.
Well, McLaren didn't just bring that new rear wing, they've also revised the floor quite significantly, big changes there, but again, you can't really get to see all the interesting bits unless a driver has a little bit of a boo-boo out on track. So we'll have to wait and see. Perhaps Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri will help us have a look underneath the car, though they're probably hoping not to. The suspension shrouding is a bit of a trend up and down the grid. They've changed that on both the front and rear end at McLaren. I believe Craig Scarborough is going to be taking a slightly deeper look at suspension design in a future episode of Tech Talk, so stay tuned for that. Looking from the car from the rear, as we heard, new rear wing, new beam wing has been introduced, and then they're running an asymmetric cooling layout with different gill configurations on the left-hand side of the car to the right-hand side of the car, and that's something a lot of teams have been playing with. Well, one other change that McLaren have brought as well is to the brake cooling layout. Now, have a look at this. This is the McLaren from earlier in the season. Take a look at the brake duct layout. Bit sticky out, he makes a sort of shape, and they've been playing around with this shape all season long. They've had big ones, little ones, round ones, square ones, and they've gone for a slightly squared off design here for Zandvoort, low average speed circuit, though brake cooling isn't really on its limit on this track, and actually with the colder than expected conditions, perhaps it's a little bit overcooled on the McLaren, but they can muck about with that as the weekend goes on. Talking about mucking about with the design, well, one thing about McLaren's design ethos this season is McLaren is the team that everybody else in the pit lane is looking at, because their upgrades philosophy is working and not everybody else's is. So what is McLaren doing differently to everybody else to make their upgrade packages so effective? Will Buxton put the question to Rob Marshall. Have a listen to this.
I think it's basically comes down to good engineering, good correlation, understanding your tools, understanding the difference between circuit, wind tunnel, R&D testing, and being on top of that and keeping everything nicely aligned. So I think, yeah, they've got a good good understanding of what they need to do to make the car quicker. And I guess delivering a sort of a suite of upgrades together, again, that's kind of helpful. You know, you tend to see the differences more than you do if you're kind of bringing one in every race, as some of the other teams kind of do. So we've been putting step changes in, others have been trickling it in. Other cars are getting faster as well. You look up and down the grid, no one's standing still.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. So from one team that's really getting its upgrades to working to another team that in the past said upgrades are overrated. I am, of course, talking about the Haas F1 team. They've introduced a new front wing this weekend, but it's not just the front wing that's changed, it's also the design of the nose. Note how this nose, the new nose, meets the front wing, the leading edge of the front wing element. Now, a number of teams have been playing around with designs in this area all season long, going back, in fact, this whole generation of cars since 2022. People are going one way, then the other, and not really coming up with a decision. We should have a look at the previous iteration of Haas nose. As you can see very clearly, the nose is much shorter, much snubber, and doesn't reach the leading edge of the front wing, only picking up on the second element. Now, that doesn't require a new crash test. It's just a bunch of very thin carbon fibre shrouding over the nose structure, so they've been able to extend it, but it is a big change, and the team are hoping that it's going to deliver a little bit more performance for them. Again, we'll have to see. The weather in Zandvoort isn't great for testing. But one team that we did expect to see a bit more from with their big, exciting, high downforce package that they introduced in Hungary, well, now that's fitted to both cars in Zandvoort. Red Bull Racing, both Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez are using this design of rear bodywork on their car this weekend. But in Hungary, it didn't really work. Well, to try and address that, the team have made a few really subtle tweaks to the bodywork. They've introduced this new sticky uppy bit on the side of the car. Above that, very interesting air duct alongside the driver's head and alongside the rear edge of the halo. Is this going to make all of the difference to the airflow over the rear of the car? Again, got to wait and see, very hard to judge, but little details like this do make big differences. If you go all the way back to BMW in the 2006 season with those big sticky uppy bits on the front of the car, well, this could be a slightly subtler, slightly less ugly interpretation of that same concept. Then around the wing mirror, Red Bull Racing have been playing around yet again. They've been playing with their wing mirror design for some time. Now, you may remember the drag reducing concept that a number of teams use with an upper section and lower section around the main mirror housing. This is designed to reduce aerodynamic drag. However, Red Bull, they seem to have created a completely new design concept with this stalk here, and it's only got an inner face. Now, there is a little linkage between this vertical element and the main mirror housing itself to make it legal, but clearly Red Bull using the mirror support here as a little bit of an aerodynamic device. Every team is mucking about in this area of the car. Will these little changes here and here make all the difference to what's going on all the way back here? Red Bull's very old wind tunnel says yes. Let's see what happens out on track as the cars take to the circuit at Zandvoort.